Well, let's dig into the Mark Norman case and the issues it raises with two journalists who have been covering the proceedings. Lee Berthiaume is a reporter with the Canadian Press, and Platt is a reporter with the National Post. Good to see you both. Lee, let me start with you. Before we get into some of the details of what we've been hearing in the pretrial, how did we get to this point? Give us a quick summation of what this story is.
Sure. Let's go back to 2014. The Navy had to retire two of its only two support ships, which are like floating gas stations. They're really important for overseas operations. So the government at that point, it's building two new ones, but they're not going to be ready until 2021, 2022. So in order to fill what was called the gap, the Conservative government decided to kind of look at this idea of converting a civilian ship into a new interim support ship. And Mark Norman at that time was the commander of the Navy, and he was one of the main supporters of this project. And so, you know, over the course, the contract wasn't finalized before the federal election in 2015.
The Liberals take over, they put it on hold. They end up finalizing, but they put it on hold, and what happens during that time?
Exactly. So the allegations that are against Mark Norman right now are that he was leaking information, government secrets basically, about that project to the media as well as the shipyard at the center of that project. It's based in Quebec. And the allegation from the Crown is that he was trying to basically undermine the cabinet's decision making by helping Davy, as well as by helping Davy pressure the government into continuing with that project.
Brian, what did we hear today? We're going to cover some of the key sort of testimony we've been hearing from the key players in this, but let's start with today.
So right now we're in a pretrial hearing. This is all about access to documents and documents held by the government and various government departments, right, and particularly key players who may be involved in the case. So the defense has issued subpoenas. People are responding to the subpoenas. The departments are supposed to be collecting all of these documents in response to the subpoenas. The defense feels that that is not happening. It's not that certain documents are not being collected. People are not fulfilling this in good faith the way that they should be.
And we're having this argument about what's personal and what's government emails and whether it should all have to be turned over, right?
And that's especially what came out today. Yeah. So today was the chief of staff to the defense minister. Her name's Zita Estrevis, and she was asked about how she carried out the searches for the documents, and it came out in court that she had searched her government BlackBerry. She had not searched any of her own personal communication, so her personal iPhone and her personal email account. And the subpoena asked for all communications, so that should be official and non-official. Right. And so that was a key point that came out in court today was in response to a subpoena that asked for all communications, you shouldn't just search your government phone, you should also be searching your personal phone.
What does the defense think is in those documents? Why are they so interested in finding out what happened going back and forth in these government departments? So
there's two things. On the one hand, they're saying that they want a lot of documents as well from the Conservative era.
Right.
And what they're saying is that Mark Norman was supporting what the Conservatives actually wanted, and that he was basically doing his job as the commander of the Navy at the time. The other thing, so what they want is partly to prove this, to prove that yes, he was just following the orders of the government of that time. And the other side is that Norman's lawyers are alleging that there has been political interference by the Liberals, not only in that project, but also that that Mark Norman has been a bit of a scapegoat for their decision to pause that project. And so what they're also looking for is evidence that the Liberal government was, either biased against him, had politically interfered in his case, and basically to prove that he was, again, a victim of political games.
And what's the purpose of that, Brian? It's like, aren't those two things separated? Whether you're taking the lead on a project and you think it's the right project, how do you reconcile that with whether or not you've leaked secrets from cabinet? I mean, you may be a fan of the project, but if you still commit an offense if you're leaking projects or leaking information to people involved in the project. I mean, it's a legal question, I know, but what's being said about so what if these documents show that he was a cheerleader for the project? He still leaked secrets. That's the allegation.
I think the defense has a few arguments that they're making, and so one of the arguments, something that Lee referred to, is that this was a project that the Conservative government did want, and there was some opposition within the civil service and particularly towards that project for various reasons. And so Vice-Admiral Norman was just trying to fulfill the wishes of the government at the time, of the elected government. But there's also another strategy going on here, which is that there's another motion that's planned, another pretrial motion that'll happen in March, which is an abuse of process motion. We don't know exactly what that's going to be yet. They have not filed that motion in court. We just know that court time's been set aside, and that's coming. And so this abuse of process motion will essentially, it will concern the allegation that Mark Norman has not been able to fully defend himself in this process, that the government has obstructed his ability to defend himself in many ways. So when they lay this criminal charge against him, things that you would normally be able to do to defend yourself against that charge, like interview witnesses and view all documents, that he has not had access to that because of these issues around cabinet secrecy and the fact that the government is, has investigated him, but it also controls pretty much all of the evidence in this case. So part of what is happening right now, I think, is a setup towards what they plan to argue in that abuse of process motion.
Okay, if I can, just to go back to your question as well, that has been one of the main questions is, was Mark Norman, I mean, he was, as you point out, he was the kind of the lead of that project. So was it a legitimate communication between him and the company involved? I mean, it makes sense for whoever is in government leading a project to be talking to the company that's fulfilling the project.
Is that necessarily a breach of trust?
And that's going to be, that is one of the arguments that the defense is making. The other argument that, with regards to leaks, to the media specifically, that they're making, I guess they're trying to kind of set it up. We haven't gotten to the point where we're having those arguments yet, because we're not really, as Brian had said, we're not in the full trial
yet. No, that's
yet.
supposed to come in August, right?
Yes, during, and run through most of the next election. But the argument that we're expecting anyways is that Ottawa leaks. That's what happens in Ottawa. Everyone leaks. Everyone talks to the media. Everyone talks, so that this was not unusual, and that he didn't do anything criminal.
We've heard this week from Chief of the Defense Staff General Vance, said he had limited communications with political officials, didn't take any notes of those conversations. What's the connection of Scott Brison, the former Treasury Board Minister who just resigned, who's implicated in this, whose name's been part of it? What's his involvement, if any?
Well, so, I mean, part of what's going on here is has become kind of a sprawling proceeding, right? There's all kinds of people involved here. So yesterday we heard from the Chief of the Defense Staff. The day before was concerned partly with Scott Brison. He now has brought his own personal lawyers to the court because he wants to have his own independent representation, partly because he is handing over some correspondence that he found on his personal devices, which is what Norman's lawyers want.
Right.
But he also feels like he needs to
narrow that net.
He wants to make sure that the requests for his own records are sort of clear and direct and not a big fishing expedition and relevant. Yeah. And also, he definitely feels that his reputation has been dragged through the mud in this. We know from evidence that has been tabled in court so far that Scott Brison was a leading reason why this leak was investigated. Brison was when the Liberal government came in, Brison was questioning the ship contract or the letter of intent that had been
Which he says is his due diligence as the president of the Treasury Board.
Yes, yes. And also, I think just as one of the experienced ministers in Trudeau's cabinet, he had a lot of rookie ministers. Right. Brison is one that had a lot of experience. So he was asking questions. He was furious about the fact that leaks came out about this, about that CBC already knew before he was going into the meeting, and then after he came out of this cabinet committee, CBC already knew what was going on. He was in his interview with the RCMP that has been tabled in court, he is the one saying he's never seen anything like this before. He's never seen a leak like this in his political career.
And that it had an impact on government's ability to do its job, is what he alleges in the RCMP
statement. So weeks more to come, obviously, in a trial that's supposed to start in August, as you say, Lee, run through the election campaign possibly. Thank you both.
Thank you
very much.